You're listening to the uMentor Talk Show. I'm your host, Fatima Al Sayed. On this weekly talk show, we invite experts from all aspects and journeys to tell us about their professions in their fields. Remember, if you have any questions for us, feel free to leave your questions on our emoji app under the Inspire platform. We also want to remind you that you can reach out to us to let us know if you have suggestions for people who want to be on the show, or if you have any interesting professionals around you from our Shia community, inshallah. On today's show, we invite Dr. Shabbir Kirmani. He's a researcher, speaker, engineer, and many more things, which we will get into. He's passionate about the future of our community and works to bridge the gap. Um, so, Shabbir is an enthusiastic technologist. He's a public speaker. He has diverse professional background working with Fortune 500 firms in sectors as diverse as finance, pharmaceuticals, and consulting. He most recently worked as a data scientist in the defense and space sector. He's also a certified project management professional. So I'm telling you guys, there's a lot here. I'm going to let Dr. Shabir expand on everything else that he's done instead of me just telling it all off the bat. Assalamu alaikum. How are
Alaikum
you?
salam. I'm well. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Um, so, can you tell us about your educational degree and your journey through that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm really excited to be here and kind of share some of my journey and story, and
Mhm.
hopefully it resonates with some of your audience.
Inshallah.
So my basis was kind of always just being curious and learning, and you may find that as a theme throughout my life.
Hmm.
My parents really inculcated, reading and learning very early on in our lives, and so when I hit as growing up when I still actually vividly remember this. We grew up in DC in Washington, in Maryland area, our first part of my life. I'm talking to
Hmm.
me and my brothers, my siblings, and my family. And then we had moved to Dubai for a few years in the Middle East, and then we moved back to the States. And I remember vividly, actually, now that you remind me, that there was a moment where I was in a admissions interview for like a middle school or something
Hmm.
in Dubai, and the principal who was interviewing me said, like, "What's your favorite subject?" And I said, "Math." I said, "I love it." And they said, "Well, what do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a doctor." And so she was like, "Really? That's very interesting." It seemed a bit off the wall. So I think initially in the first part of my life, I was very intrigued by that. I came from a family of doctors. I had, especially from my mom's side, a lot of physicians in the family, and that was
Hmm.
kind of the drift, if you will, of how things were. But when I hit college, I actually found that I had an aptitude for math and an interest in things that were applied math, and I kind of went down that avenue. So I actually studied economics as a major, and I also did two minors, in one in math and one in computer science. Um, the way I was able to do that was because I did this program in high school called dual enrollment, which let you do college classes while you were in high school, which
Hmm.
really saved me a lot of time, which was really great and allowed me to learn more. And so around that time, I had read, while I was just in college or entering college, I had read Iqtisaduna by Shaykh Baqir Sadr, which influenced me quite a bit. That I did not know this whole world of Islam and economics, or what's Islam's worldview on economics.
Hmm.
And also, I had read Freakonomics, which is quite an interesting book, which is at the bridge of behavioral economics, psychology, and economics, which is quite fascinating book to me,
Hmm.
by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner, two co-authors, one an economist, one a journalist.
Hmm.
And also, the other thing was, it was the recession of 2007, 2009, and it was the peak of that. And so that economy was really on that radar. So I was fascinated by
Hmm.
that. And so then I went on into applied more math. So I did my master's in engineering, and then I also did my PhD in engineering. So, but
Hmm.
I'll stop and pause here for a second because
No
we'll let
worries.
that marinate.
There's a lot here. So there's a lot of, I think, advice, valuable advice that we can learn from you. The first advice that I want to ask you about is what advice do you give for curious youth who are getting into college, university, and are unsure of what they want to do?
Yeah, really, really great question. So, definitely try to get a pulse of understanding yourself and who you are. So, one of
Mhm.
the traditions that really resonated with me throughout my life is the one, "Man arafa nafsa arafa rabba," where we're told that the one who understands themselves understands their Lord. And sometimes we glance over this very quickly, but it's a really deep tradition. Like, understanding yourself can help you lead to understanding your Lord. Is that even possible? Like
Mm,
Einstein once said that, I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are just details. And so that's something that's really important. So I would always leave the door open to exploring different fields and always being intellectually curious. Number one. The other thing I often mention for people to do is the ikigai, or ikigai, which comes from Japan, and it's essentially just drawing three Venn diagrams, and each circle, and looking at the overlap between them, right? And
mhm,
this has been formed in different ways. Many people have taken and made their own. Anyways, the first circle is, what do you love doing? And you can just
mhm,
go down the list. It doesn't have to be one thing, it doesn't have to be two, it could be several things, right? You could say sports, you could say math, you could say physics, you could say whatever's your interest, art, writing, whatever it is. Write that all down in one circle. And then the second circle is, if you put your heart and mind to it, if you put in the work, if you put your heart and mind to it, what could you be the best in the world at? The world. And
mhm,
oftentimes, like for us, people have told me, and I sometimes reflect on this. For me, maybe it'd be, if I put my heart and mind to it, dedicated, the 10,000 hour rule, as it's become famous, to become world class in anything. Maybe I could be a pretty good speaker. Everyone
mhm,
has their own answer, right? So what is that? And honestly tell yourself that. You don't have to share this with anyone. This is just personal.
mhm,
And the third circle is, what could you deliver value to others in? And another way of saying that is, what would people be willing to open their wallet to pay you for? What would people
okay.
find? And so when you look at the intersection of these three things, it may help give you some clarity on what you want to do with your life. And in the middle, for example, I often get many things that are very similar, like uh, author, public speaker,
Mhm,
consultant, coach, advisor, things, professor. These things always show up in mine. And it may change over time because we change as humans.
mhm,
The second thing I would really recommend is taking personality tests.
mhm,
Myers-Briggs or others, but they're not 100%. Keep that in mind. But they may get you 80% of the way there, or 90% of the way there. And always remember, we are dynamic. There's a study that was done by Dan Gilbert at Harvard University that said
mhm.
we don't realize how much we change over a 10 years decade of our lifespan. Oftentimes we change a lot. So oftentimes we sometimes do these personality tests once in high school, once in college, and we're done. You should do this periodically to see how you've changed as a
Or you
person.
do it one time, you're like, "This is my future, this is my fate, that's it."
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm,
that's a big thing, and that can be a big problem, especially if
mhm.
you answer it not how you are, but how you want to be. And
Yeah,
so that can be a huge challenge because it gives you misdirection in
yeah,
life. And that's actually a really important point, which I'll bring up. Is there was a moment in my life, I've always been good in math, but there was a slump
mhm,
period in my high school years, or middle school years actually, where I wasn't doing so well. But I
mhm,
started thinking psychologically that I was incompetent in terms of math. Whereas I
mhm.
realized I wasn't doing my homework. I wasn't doing the assignments.
You weren't
You're
working
not
for
going to
it.
understand. I wasn't
Mhm,
working for it. So
mhm,
oftentimes you may think you're not good at chemistry or math or physics or science or astronomy or whatever the subject it is, but you have to ask yourself, first of all, did you put in your all before
yeah,
you made this conclusion that you don't get it? The most important technique to success is actually what Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford University, she's written an excellent book called Mindset, and she
mhm,
talks about the growth mindset. And the most important word to success is yet. If you say, I don't get math,
mhm,
don't say, I don't get math. Say, I don't get math yet. I don't get the subject yet. I haven't gotten there yet. There's always these cycles in life where you will eventually get there. So
mhm.
personality test, and then the third thing is asking other people. Sometimes
Okay.
people you really believe and trust and rely on, family, friends, family members, friends, ask them their sincere and honest opinion. Hey, how could I be better? What's my blind spot? What am I not seeing that I could improve on? Or what are my talents that you see in me? I sometimes give a public speech, and I may think it's not the most difficult thing, but oftentimes people come to me and say, I don't think I could ever do that. But
Mm,
if I ask them what they do in their life, there's probably a dozen things that I could never fathom doing because
mhm,
they do it so well. So sometimes an outsider's perspective helps.
yeah. Something you said, about the Q key, is that what it's called?
Ikigai. Yeah, Ikigai.
Ikigai.
Yes.
So, you said that, one thing is knowing what you're valuable for, basically, right? What would people pay you for? Sometimes if we don't value our own efforts, or our own, talents, we won't be able to define that, right? So how do you get to that point of knowing what you should be valued for?
Yeah, it's a really good question, a really important one. One thing that often happens as human beings is we have self-doubt, which creeps in, and
Mm,
oftentimes this culminates with like imposter syndrome. If you
yeah.
read, there's I can mention a lot of books on this topic, but you will find that there's something called imposter syndrome. When they did a survey of people at top-tier universities in America, at like the MITs and Harvards of the world, they found that the majority, if not 50%, 40%, some substantial population actually suffered from imposter syndrome at some of these top universities.
Mm,
They feel like they're the one who got there, they just slipped in
mm,
admissions. This is separate from those people who paid to get into the likes of Harvard that was in the news
yeah.
recently. But the idea was if 40% of the population is thinking they just slipped in, that's imposter syndrome, that it can't be that many people who actually do that, maybe one or two. And so you belong. That's the first thing that you need to tell
Mhm,
yourself. And you are capable and you are able. And sometimes you may find that the market for certain things is a lot more than you imagined for it to be. Take in our modern world NFTs today. I'm talking to a lot of people who are in the art space who
mhm,
are like monetizing, and they realize that there's a market for what they're doing in the NFT space and how that can be monetized. We often don't value these things. So it's very important to first have self belief,
mhm.
number one, and number two, then take it on. I'll give a quick, very, very quick story. There's a guy who was known as the king of Las Vegas. I'm not endorsing Las Vegas, but he said
Mhm.
he was known as the king. And so they asked him, after many years, 30, 40 years, a friend of his asked him, like, hey, who gave you that title? Just curious, out of curiosity, asked him, who called you that? He said, I called myself that. I called myself the king of Las Vegas. And then everyone started catching on.
Mhm,
And so sometimes it's that self-belief to first believe that you have that value.
mhm.
And you may be surprised, in our world today, we live in a very different world than 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there was only a few fields that you could go into. You became a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. Our world is totally different now. We have
Mhm.
YouTube, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have all these social media
Social media
platforms,
platforms. Mhm,
TikTok, across the board, right?
mhm,
And the world's about to get even more decentralized, and it's about
mm.
to get even more with the blockchain technology. Because before, I mean, now we need Uber as a middleman, or we need some other
Yeah.
service provider as a middleman. But this is going to change that dynamic. So today, there are people who are making the substantial income making YouTube videos. This is
Yeah.
happening. People are doing their NFT and artwork. People are really moving. You may have heard of the term, it's quite old now, but that digital nomads, right? People are
Mhm.
moving, especially with COVID. So you may find a tremendous marketplace, and you just have to try and stay with it and stay committed, and inshallah, you'll go far.
Inshallah. So put your goals in mind and maybe do that, test and see what comes out, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Um,
mean, very quickly to that point,
mhm.
point.
Yeah.
Sometimes this ecosystem which you operate is it matters. If you go to the secular space outside of the religious realm,
Mhm,
it's if you get paid. I'm giving an example because we're talking about that particular question of ikigai.
mhm,
$1,000 for a lecture is a very small amount. It's very like for if you go outside of the religious space.
mm,
In fact, I remember I was part of one of these conferences. I think it was IMI actually. The
mhm.
good people there do great work, and we were doing a youth conference, and we were calling some renowned speakers, and the amounts that they were asking for public speaking. Was astronomical. In fact,
Mm,
one of these very famous people who actually had a TED talk, their assistant, uh, they said this guy's booked for 2 years out, but
mm,
his assistant's available, and his assistant's numbers were astronomical. So why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is your audience may think that, oh, my value in terms of what people are willing to pay for this may be only a couple $100, whereas you may find that there are people who are willing to actually contribute a lot more than you imagine. So there's
mhm.
also that side of the equation. But
And don't
anyways,
undervalue yourself, right?
do not do that. That's right.
Mhm. Um, so there's a lot here, and I want to focus on a couple of the important things of your career. So can you take us through? We talked about your economics. Can you take us through the engineering part of your career and how you got into that and how that defines you in your journey?
Yeah, so that was quite interesting because there was also another particular field that I was interested in that my school didn't have that degree. In fact, at that time, not many universities had that degree explicitly, and that's financial engineering.
Hmm.
That's literally taking the tools of, quantitative analysis, financial engineering, computer science, math, statistics, essentially, and combining it and applying it to the finance field. Excuse me. And I was quite fascinated by that. And the things that I needed in the engineering field, I kind of already had. I remember making the jump from economics to the master's program in engineering
Mhm.
was it was I think the prereqs were you had to have like differential equations, you had to obviously calculus before that, and you had to have no programming, and you have to have some advanced stats.
Okay.
Because of my minors in computer science and my minors in math, I already knew those things and I already taken them. So the transition was very smooth.
Mhm.
So that really helped me a lot. And so in engineering it gave me a skill set to actually think in a very rigorous way. And also a lot of this boils down to applied math. If you look at the world that we live in today, computer science, electrical engineering, various engineering fields, all of them can actually be boiled down to applied mathematics in some form.
Mhm.
And so that's really where my interest was, and that's really where I was quite, passionate about. And
Mhm.
so that led me to working as a data scientist. And then thereafter, I also ended up working in the space of, a startup and blockchain technology.
Mhm.
And just became fascinated with that space about where our world is going. I'm really focused on the future of where we're going. And that's like AI, artificial intelligence, that's blockchain technology, that's IoT or the Internet of Things, and quantum computing, and so many other things. So that engineering degree, I think, helped to open the doors and understanding a lot of these things.
Mhm. It's interesting because when you speak about what you do, um, someone listening from the outside can think, "Oh, how do these things even relate?" Right? Because everything looks like it's on the other side of the spectrum. But when you
Mm,
speak about it, it really shows how every single thing that you've done has led you into that different path, right? So, my
yes.
question to you is, how can a person identify an opportunity and go forward and seize that opportunity if they are comfortable already within the job that they're doing?
Sure, to seek out other opportunities and see
Mhm.
what test the water. So there's a balance here, right? So you definitely want to be curious. You want to manage your risk, but you also want to make sure you take on this opportunity. I'll give
Mhm.
this through a really quick example. If we take the example of Jeff Bezos, who's like the founder of Amazon, and he's often richest or first or second. He goes back and forth with Elon Musk and others in the world. He was actually quite, if you read his biography, he was actually quite well set on Wall Street. He was one of the youngest partners. He was financially very stable. But
Mhm.
he thought to himself that if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. And so he went and he pursued this. Now, um, what are some things that you should do before you make this jump? Oftentimes, you want to be prudent, but also make the jump. What does that mean? Everyone's circumstance is different, but you want to have, if you're going to make a jump from one career to another, or for those who are listening who are in employment and jobs and they want to shift towards business, for example, because it's highly recommended from the perspective of the Ahlul-Bayt to do business, right?
Mhm.
Numerous traditions, right? Like there's 10 parts of sustenance, 9 of them are in business, and a whole slew. The best aid to faith is wealth, a lot of them, and
Mhm.
a lot of traditions on business. Keeping that aside for a moment, if you want to make the jump in your career shift or from employment into business or whatever it may be, oftentimes it's recommended that you have like 6 to 12 months of savings as a cushion for you in terms of being able to survive and sustain yourself and your family if you have a
Mhm.
family. So that's really important to keep in mind. So you want to have that. Also, you want to make sure that you've done your readings and your understanding about the field you're trying to get into. Our world has actually made it a lot more actually more convenient, right? So let's say you want to make a shift into data science. I remember when I went to data science, there weren't really data science degrees, although statistics has been doing data science for forever. We just haven't, like, it became a hot buzz term in like 5 years ago or 6 years ago.
Okay.
And so you can do certifications online through a lot of these universities, and then get some type of certification or something that will give you some credibility in the space that allows you, and then you can interview and then possibly even intern. Sometimes you can get involved in interior services. Let's say you pick up
Mhm.
a new skill set and you try to test the waters to see, is this something you enjoy or actually like. One thing that's really important for your audience that may be important is sometimes the most important career decisions not necessarily, although what you do is very important, more important than that is perhaps the industry that you pick. If you're
Mhm.
passionate about the industry in which you are, you may find that you go a lot further. So that fit is also very, very important. So
Mhm.
the last thing that I'll mention is one of the biggest regrets that people have on their deathbed is actually regret itself. That is, I wish I had pursued my dreams. I wish
Mm,
I had actually gone and made the jump. There's two types. Warren Buffett, who's obviously quite well known, he mentions that there's two types of regret: hot regret and cold regret. And he framed this in the context of investment, but it applies to life in general. And that is, whenever he invested in a company that, for example, it ended up not doing as well as he thought it would do, that was cold regret. That was regret. He regretted it, but it wasn't something that was torturing him or really bothering him. But the regret that was the worst was the hot regret. Those companies that he knew he should have invested in that he didn't. So even if that's a small amount, now this needs to be counterbalanced with the idea of FOMO, or like fear of missing out, right? So
mhm.
you don't want to apply this to every single thing. This only applies when you've done your homework and you know there's a market or there's a need or there's some success on the horizon. That doesn't mean just reading one pamphlet. That means doing the in-depth research, and then you are convinced that this is what the path. Then you trust Allah, you trust you trust the process, and you actually make that leap. Having those things in mind, it will help you and go a long way.
Inshallah. You
Inshallah.
mentioned quite a bit about your passion for public speaking and lecturing. So, can you tell us a bit about that career? And you've also created this into something that is um, of your religious duty and obligation, right? So, can you expand on that?
Yes, absolutely. So, with respect to public speaking, it was quite something that had inspired me. My mom actually used to speak, still speaks before me. She's quite much more knowledgeable than I am. And she actually comes from a line of scholars
Mhm.
religious scholars. And so that I think had an impact on me historically as
That's
well.
amazing. Mhm.
Uh, and so I think that may have had an impact, intellectual curiosity on that front. Now, there is one quote that has always really stuck with me throughout my life that's actually from Teddy Roosevelt, or the
Mhm.
president, Theodore Roosevelt. And he gave this at a speech at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris. And the speech is called "A Citizenship in a Republic." But there's an excerpt of it, a small portion that is very famous now, and I think should be more famous. And it's called "The Man in the Arena." And
Mhm.
he essentially says that, the credit does not belong to the one who is sitting in the stands in the arena and pointing the finger at the person who is on the arena, in the arena, on the court, so to speak, uh, and whose face is marred with sweat and blood, and who is struggling. The credit doesn't belong to the one who criticizes. The credit belongs to the one who's actually fighting in the arena. And this is a really good metaphor, to me, for life, right?
Mhm.
Are you on the court or not? Are you really there? Because there's going to be so many people who criticize you along the way. But those are like athletes who are on the court. There's thousands of people in the stands. How many people do they hear? They don't hear any individual. They just hear random noise that's coming. Sometimes they're encouraging, sometimes they're not. But everyone's focused on the athlete who's on the court. And I think it's very important that to use that to better this world and this society.
Mhm.
It's not fame for the sake of fame. It's actually to do the right thing, to have courage. One thing that, if I can mention to your audience, is our world rewards courage. And to
Mhm.
have the courage to be able to fail in front of people. I'll tell you, I've been lecturing for over like 12 years now, and I have failed so many times. I forgot what I was going to say. I lost a point. I mentioned, like, it's dozens and dozens, especially when I started out. But if you stay with that, you can actually go very far. um, and that's the real key, to
Mhm.
to not lose enthusiasm through that whole process and not be discouraged. And you will definitely be rewarded with success on the other side. That may be material, that may be immaterial, that may be impact. Everyone has
Mhm.
different motivators. For me, it's impact. Am I making the world a better place? Am I
Yeah.
reducing suffering? Am I improving people's quality of life? So stay with it, and don't give up, and you'll go very far.
We're reaching the end of our show, but I would love to hear a bit about how Islam has helped you on your road to success.
Absolutely. Great question. So, for me, I had read the history of Islam a little early on, quite early on, and I've always been intrigued by it. And I always wondered, what is it that led Islam, historically, it's well documented amongst all historians that for at least 300 years, the center of knowledge in the world was Baghdad, right? From
Mhm.
800 to 1100 AD. It's well known. And that's where we got mathematics, algebra in particular. Kitab al-Jabr wal-Muqabil was written by Muhammad al-Khawarizmi in this era. In fact, Muhammad al-Khawarizmi's name runs this world today because the Latinization of Khawarizmi today is algorithm. Google in our world and
Mm.
all the social media, everyone, everything runs on an algorithm, and that directly comes from Khawarizmi. For the
Mhm.
chemists, alchemy comes directly from Arabic, which literally means was from the root word of ash or ashes. Dozens and dozens of words. So I always wondered what led to the downfall and the decline of Islam. Like, why was it that it's thriving? And
Mhm.
there's several reasons what historians give. Some may be substantial, some may not. But one of the themes that keeps coming up is, for example, fatwas that were given by certain religious clergy, either themselves or under pressure of the rulers, that
Mm.
mathematics is the work of the devil.
Mm.
And this led to a decline. I would invite our audience to study someone by the name of Khwaja Nasiruddin Tusi, who was not only arguably one of the greatest scientists of his time, he was also perhaps one of the greatest religious scholars of his time. He was a, you know, he
Mhm.
was a, and so if in fact if you read Copernicus's model of the universe, because they believed that the universe was geocentric as opposed to heliocentric, his model of the universe actually uh, relies on something called, which we now call the Tusi couple. Why? Because when you look at the graphs of Copernicus and you look at the graphs of Tusi, they are identical. The only difference is Arabic letters for Tusi and Latin letters for Copernicus.
Mhm.
Now, here's the main difference. Tusi was well before him, so the implication is that he was reading what was going on there. Coming back to your question,
Mhm.
I don't segregate based on what I've read from our scholars. I do not segregate Islam into religious sciences and non-religious sciences. To me, based on the readings of the scholars that I've read, knowledge is either takes you closer to God or away from
Mhm.
God. That's it. And so when you look at life from that paradigm, everything shifts
I mean, when
because
you look at the teachings of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, you can see the proof of that, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's really what's important. We need more people who are actually from diverse backgrounds,
Mhm.
academically, professionally, and otherwise, to actually bring that and revive that culture of the golden era, if you
Mhm.
will.
I'm seeing that more and more these days, inshallah. You can see a spark of that even on social media. We're getting more teachings out there and more, Shia professionals who are shining the light on our teachings and the Ahlul-Bayt, right? So
Absolutely.
inshallah, we can get closer to that. What are your goals in the future, Dr. Shabir?
Yeah, so I'm right now what I'm working on, the project that I'm working on is trying to lay the foundation for the future of our community in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years and hopefully
Mhm.
beyond. We're noticing that as people are getting more educated in our communities, which is fantastic. It's people becoming doctors, lawyers, engineers, but not only that, they're becoming top journalists, they're becoming economists, they're becoming data scientists, they're becoming researchers, and all of that is fantastic.
Mhm.
Simultaneous to this, we're also noticing that people's caliber of their questions are rising.
Mhm.
The questions that may have been asked a decade or two ago are not going to fly anymore in this generation. We live in a world, for example, I'm thinking of Dr. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, where he teaches a class called behavioral genetics. And he's talking about, we know that, for example, if someone has a gene, we've known for a long time that if someone has, for example, um, our genetics make up our physical appearance but we now know, and we have known for a while, that our genetics also make up our behavior. And
Mhm.
we know that there are certain genes, for example, a gene variant called MAO alpha, and this MAO alpha gene, for example, has been tied and correlated to certain behaviors. And so what does this have to do with Islam? What does epigenetics have to do with Islam? What does quantum computing have to do with Islam? What does blockchain technology? I'm trying to help lay the foundation before I move to the next chapter of my career, inshallah, to
Inshallah.
answer some of these questions to the satisfaction of those who are asking these questions. So that's what I'm busy with today.
Inshallah. We're looking forward to reading about this. We're in the final 30 seconds of our show, but can you give us your final piece of advice for our youth today? We've gotten so much advice from you, but
Yeah,
your
no,
golden piece.
absolutely. Absolutely. Stay curious. Stay
Mm.
curious and always learning. And that means in your professional, personal, and every part of your life. Make sure that, for example, you know how to manage your stress, make sure you know how to work hard, make sure you know how to work smart. These three things are very important. You may find that you're excelling in your career, but if you can't manage your stress, that may bleed over into anger and affect your personal relationships. Always improve professionally as well as personally and make the world a better place.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shabbir Kirmani, for your invaluable advice and your extensive career and journey, and for sharing that with us today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You were just listening to the uMentor Talk Show. If you missed this or future shows, you can always hear the replay on the uMentor website under prior talk shows. Um, and like I said at the beginning of the show, if you know any speakers or anyone who would be interested, a professional within your community who would be interested in coming on the talk show, please reach out to us at info@emojioutreach.org.